Is now in Egypt. It's the latest round of shuttle diplomacy. John Kerry arrived in Cairo early on Thursday after spending a day in Israel and the West Bank. While there, he met Israeli and Palestinian leaders as well as the UN Secretary General. Our diplomatic editor, James Bays, is in West Jerusalem, and he joins me from there now. James, any reaction from Israel, especially, of course, to that UNRWA building attack?
Well, we have been working the phones here, trying to seek Israeli reaction. There is no official comment at this stage. As we've been speaking to Israeli officials, they are investigating and say that they will get back to us at a later point in time. I can tell you, Stephen, that when we first in Jerusalem heard about the attack on the school, I just completed an interview with one of Benjamin Netanyahu's key advisors, Ambassador Dore. Now, during that interview, I asked him repeatedly about the death of civilians, the targeting of civilians, and exactly what Israel's policy was. Let's listen to what he had to say.
It is Israel that has warned the civilian population to get away from the armaments which Hamas has placed in various Palestinian cities.
But your warnings aren't working if 177 children have died.
Well, again, I don't want to get into a dispute over the numbers.
But it's a huge number. And they obviously are non-combatant.
One person dying is too many. But Israel has a right, and it must defend itself. We are getting hit every day. And not just military bases, because they don't aim it at military bases, but our towns and villages. Now, the fact that we don't have hundreds of people dead is only because Israel invested heavily in its civil defense system, while Hamas invested heavily in its offensive rockets and in its attack tunnels. To come to Israel and say Israel is at fault because Hamas uses its population as human shields to shield its missiles is simply incorrect.
You talk about human shields, yet if you know there are civilians down there, whether they're being used as human shields or not, surely you shouldn't unleash those missiles.
Well, first of all, you are being attacked. You see on the ground missiles that are going to be fired at your civilian population.
But there are civilians that you're targeting at the same time and you know they're there. You're just telling me human shields are there. That means there are civilians there. Surely you shouldn't, at that point, unleash your weapons of war.
What Israel has been trying to do is to warn these people so they will not stay there. But, you know, what are the choices Israel has in this kind of a situation? And what is the choice that a British audience in London or in Paris or German people in Berlin would face? You have three choices. You can say, wait a minute, they're firing rockets at my civilian population. I will therefore, as a result, unleash my full military power. I'll napalm the whole area. I'll bomb the whole city into rubble. Israel won't do that. The second choice we have is to say, you know what? There's nothing we can do. There are some civilians mixed in with the military capability in these particular areas of the Gaza Strip. We're just going to raise our hands. But if we do that...
Isn't that the option you should take? Isn't that the option? You mentioned the British and the Americans. That's what they did in Afghanistan and Iraq. When there were civilians in a property, they didn't attack.
And when we see civilians, mixed with their Hamas military, we call off the attack.
Ambassador Dore there speaking about Israel's efforts to avoid civilian casualties. Moments after finishing that interview, we heard about that UN school being hit in Gaza. I told you a moment ago, Stephen, no Israeli reaction, but we have, since we were playing that interview, been phoned by the Israeli military again. They called us back from our earlier call, and they say they're still investigating reports, but they say that they detected the signature of Palestinian rockets being fired in Gaza, and they think it's possible that those Palestinian rockets landed short of their target and may have been the rockets that hit the school. So I think that's a very significant claim from the Israelis. Obviously, when people get to the scene, as there are people at the scene, reporters and other observers, you may well be able to tell from the debris exactly who was responsible for this attack. A suggestion from the Israelis just now that it could have been Palestinian rockets. Watch for a reaction, I think, in the coming minutes and hours from the United Nations. Headquarters is waking up in New York. I'm sure at UN headquarters in New York there'll be a lot of talk about a UN school being hit.
And it'll be interesting to see what evidence the Israelis can offer for that. James Bays in West Jerusalem, thank you very much.